everybody.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your time today. And thank you, UXDX, for this amazing conference and for giving us a platform to talk about something we're both very passionate about: research, analytics, triangulation, and all the magic that comes from it. Um, he did such an amazing job introducing us. There's very little I can add to that. But my name is Archana Shah. I work at LexisNexis as a principal UX researcher. I've been a researcher for over a decade now, just with a plethora of different titles.
I'm Subhasree Chatterjee. I'm a data analytics manager working in LexisNexis as well. I was initially hired to help UX research team with their data needs, and that's where I met Archana. But I quickly realized that it's not really about me helping them with data needs, but working together and collaborating together can help us create much more holistic picture of the problem that we are trying to solve. And that kind of created this framework that we are going to talk to you all about. Before we go any further, we wanted to quickly introduce all of you to our protagonist, who we are going to use them today to tell the story from us, going from strangers to best friends to now this framework. So peanut butter here is the data analyst.
And chocolate represents research, because chocolate. And we wanted to prime you for lunch.
So as a data analyst working with product, the questions that I'm generally trying to answer is how big is the problem? How much is the problem? Or like how many users are feeling that kind of problem? And generally trying to quantify the effect or the problem space. And that's why I generally use different kind of codes to create different kind of narratives around graphs and charts and trend analysis to be able to provide answer for those questions.
And on the flip side, traditionally, research has been well known for going to the source of the problem, the users. So what are the problems? What are the problem spaces? What are the boundaries? Why do those pain points exist? And I might be preaching a little bit to the choir over here, but the usual slew of methods that apply over here are contextual inquiries and surveys and so on and so forth. And that's what my toolkit tended to consist of. So a little bit about the processes when we were both new to the organization. Everything that you're going to look at today is oversimplified for the purposes of this talk, but this will give you a general sense of how it broke out. So you start with a business question. Any business question is never as simple. There's lots of facets to it, lots of research questions it breaks down into. Once you have that, there's the research planning. What method is going to be best for answering those questions most effectively and efficiently? Once you've collected all of that data, what you're working on then is compiling all of that information to then put together your recommendations. So it's advice, answers, or directions for what the business should do.
The analytics process looks pretty similar as well. So when we get the business questions, we are generally trying to figure out what part of the question can be answered by the data and analytics that we have access to. We then generally go off to figure out what are those data sources that we can get some of these answers from, have those findings, create a narrative around it, create some data and insights based on the graphs and dashboards, and then we go back to our stakeholder with the recommendations from those data and insights.
And that brings us to the fun story part of the talk today. This is a tale of two strangers, and it's a story from 2017, so basically a million years ago. But this was a story of where peanut butter and chocolate were standing on two opposing ends of a cliff and did not know anything about each other at all. And something that you should know, any good story starts with some background and some context, so here it is. The world that Subhasree and I work in is basically one that caters to legal professionals. So for any of you who have watched any kind of courtroom dramas, Suits, or any one of those legal dramas, you may already have an inkling of how complicated law is. Now, if law is going to be complicated, legal tech that supports that world, just as complicated, if not more. And the problem that we were looking at was basically catered to solving for legal professionals. A cornerstone of what legal professionals do is legal research, looking at all of that history, all of that case, all of the nuances and subtleties to be able to build a solid one that you can present. And you cannot afford to look like a fool in court. And that is exactly what our flagship product was catering to, and it was meant to support that research. Now, that said, customer support was overwhelmed and inundated with lots of people calling in, asking for help in using that system. And this was a problem because we actually did have a mechanism to self-serve, look at the capabilities, and figure out how to use the system in the system itself. So what business came to us with was a simple question of, maybe we should rebuild help, add in all those bells and whistles, add in more content that people can self-serve and use the system for. And like most projects these days, you got 1 month to do it. And that, of course, meant that Subhasree and I were scrambling, and we were running off in our own individual paths to find as many answers over there as we could. So breaking down that entire process, the focus of our talk today is more the collaboration and the framework piece of it. So I'm not going to bore you with the methods or the details over there. But what I can tell you is, from the business question of would rebuilding help, what I broke that out into as research question is, why do users need help? And if they need help, where are they seeking it? Where do they want to seek it? And for this, I ran interviews. And the biggest takeaway that came from those interviews with customers who were calling in frequently was, there's a lot of data in your head. You're thinking about your client. You're thinking about their issue. You're thinking about the state you're in when you're researching that issue. There's so much in your head. Putting all that into the system to get everything that's relevant, extremely difficult. And so it was clear to me that users wanted help with figuring out how to craft an effective search. And the second piece of this was the survey. So the piece of where do users need help? This was fairly straightforward. All of the data has been falsified to be respectful of our confidentiality needs, but the takeaway was the same. Yes, people wanted to go to customer support, but if you look at that big red box, they wanted to find help online. So they wanted help online, but no one seemed to be using it.
So when I looked at the business question of if we should improve the in-product help, the data analytics question that I came up with basically was to figure out, are people using the current help system? And if they are, how frequently do they use it? And when in their user journey within our product are they trying to use help? So when I looked at the data, what I found was very low percentage of current users are actually interacting with help. Even among those, only 20% are coming back and using it multiple times. But the sessions where they are interacting with help are not successful. So they are probably not able to find what they are looking for. And they are generally using help right after running a search. So the conclusion from this analysis was that people are not really interacting with the in-product help. So remember, in this scenario, we don't know each other. So we went separately to our stakeholders and provided with our insights and findings. And based on that time crunch that we were running through, the product actually decided to improve the in-product help that we already have, add more content to it, add more flexibility and options for the users to be able to interact with the help system, and help them with their searches. So we ended up creating this new and improved in-product help, but nobody really came. So we didn't really have any increased engagement with the in-product help. People were still calling up customer support to get the help that they needed. So what went wrong here? I did provide the insights that people are not really interacting with our in-product help. This one over here suggested, after talking with 5 users, that we should build new and improved help.
To be clear, I made no such recommendation. You can get the problem right and the solution wrong, and that happens a fair bit. At least I shed a lot of light on the subtlety, the nuances, and so much of complexity that goes into that search system that clearly needed help. What did you do? Boil all of that into a number on a bar chart?
Well, my bar chart at least talked about the whole user base that we had and people who were using or not using help. But of course, we should all listen to your qual insights. So basically, vibes.
Those vibes are why we have the product being half as successful as it is today. You try launching a successful product without understanding the user or the problem space more deeply.
What are we going to do with understanding our users deeply? We are not doing therapy sessions here. We are just trying to solve business problems.
No, you're right. Let's just keep solving the wrong problems and A/B test ourselves off a cliff. We hope this isn't the case, but for those of you that it was, I hope it wasn't triggering. But a lot of this, if it wasn't text, may have been subtext for all of you. Now, in all seriousness and jokes apart, what we found over the years that we've been working together with our teams, growing our teams, and also the conversations we've had the privilege of having across the industry is there are some very real barriers that exist between our functions. Now, one of them, lack of clarity in roles. If you don't know what the other person does, how do you even know what to go and ask of them? And then who owns which piece of the question? And it's only natural to butt heads. In the age of AI, when everything is accelerated, everyone wants those insights yesterday, that tension becomes a little bit stronger. The second is lack of understanding of each other's disciplines. No, research is not just talking to 5 users, and analytics is not just bar charts. There's a far more depth to what each of us is capable of. But again, without that understanding and all of that jargon that can come with each of these, that barrier gets stronger. Time constraints. At this point, we're all working with stakeholders who wanted those insights yesterday. And those bring a very real pressure, forcing us to resort to a toolkit we already know and are familiar with. And the last of this, of course, is stakeholder biases. Now, I don't know if this is also relatable, but over my career, I've worked with stakeholders who built features off of that one thing, that one user said, that one time. But at the same time, I've also had stakeholders who will only budge if there is a statistically significant number attached to anything I present. And both of these biases are real. Now, they're just as real as the impact it can have on the business. If you continue down that path and you refuse to change, you could be solving the wrong problems. And when you're solving those wrong problems, it leads to a lot of repercussions as well. You're less efficient, and it's a lot more expensive. At LexisNexis, an A/B test can take about 3 weeks. And if you're basically trying to recruit from a very niche market audience, then even one single qualitative study that you want to get really strong, reliable results on can take very long. And time is money.
So are we all doomed here? Don't we have any way to get out of the spiral? We actually might have a solution for you. So let us now imagine in this parallel universe where UX research and analytics are best friends. We know each other's strength. We talk to each other on a regular basis. And in this scenario, the process can actually look pretty different. So whenever the moment that we get business questions, we sit together and we figure out what part of the question can be answered best by research team versus the part of which can be best answered by the analytics team. Then we go off, we do our research, we do our analysis, and the findings that we get, we then come together and share that recommendation based on our holistic understanding of our user problem and the problem that we are trying to solve. And this is, of course, iterative as well, because the insights that you are getting can lead to more questions that we need to answer. In this scenario, the questions that I got that I needed to solve for were still the same. Are people using help? How are they using help? How frequently do they use help? And my findings were exactly the same as well, that they are not using help, and the sessions that they use, they are not finding what they are looking for, and they are using help right after running a search.
Now, the nice thing about having a BFF is you know exactly what they're capable of, what they're going to find, and how it might drive your next steps. So it became a lot easier for me to plan sequential research and parallel research. Now, the piece of this that I knew I could run in parallel, with that 1 month still in place, was what do users want? So that same survey was run, same results were found, people wanted help online. So when you put it all together, people wanted help online, but success rate was very low even when they used it. So maybe online help wasn't offering things in the right manner. Customer support was clearly doing something strongly different from whatever was available in the system. And the second piece of this, we knew they wanted help with search because Subhasree's data pointed out that whenever they used help, it was typically after they ran the search. But when that was available in the system with all those bells and whistles, they still weren't clicking into it. So maybe people are just having a hard time finding it. So I took the first piece of the puzzle, which was basically, what is customer support doing that's distinctly different from our online system? So this time around, my research question was a little bit more pointed. It wasn't just, why do you need help? It was, why do you need help with search? And therefore, my findings were also far more pointed. It was the usual stuff of like, there's too much in my head, lots of variables that I need to plug in, and I need comprehensive coverage. But it was also, The system isn't hard to use. I can figure out the bells and whistles. I don't know what to put in, the terms, the right kinds of sources, what libraries should I be looking in. All of that is what my biggest problem is. And that's why it's wonderful to have someone on the phone brainstorming with me, telling me how to put those terms and connectors together, craft that search, and then I know I have far more confidence in the answers that I got.
And when I was trying to answer the question of are they not able to find what we have in the product, we conducted some A/B tests and made help much more visible in the product. But even after doing that, people were still not engaging with the help that we have in system. People were still calling up customer support, and they were still doing that right after running a search. So this time around, because we were talking to each other and based on all of these additional insights that we have, we actually ended up creating a more comprehensive narrative of the problem space. We realized that even if we create much more enhanced capabilities in the product, people are probably still not going to use it because they didn't really needed help with just writing search. They needed that brainstorming partner to be able to do that kind of like sounding board, going back and forth, to figure out answers for those very specific and complex questions that they had. So our recommendation for the product this time around was different. We suggested that enhancing the capabilities probably not going to increase engagement or not going to reduce the customer support volume that we were seeing, but maybe conversational help can help. So we actually ended up shelving in this time the project. And that actually ended up saving a lot of time, money, and resource, as you can imagine, for the business. So bridging perspective together this way can really help us become more effective analyst and researcher, because we can mitigate some of the blind spots that we might have if we are working in our silos. And it can create much more effective solutions for our users and for our business.
Yeah, sounds simple, right? But we've taken many a stumble along our journey to building this framework, and we'll walk you through what we've learned along the way as well. So first portion of it, find your counterpart. And for that, if screaming Marco and waiting for the polo doesn't work, typically what you can do is reach out to product. More often than not, product naturally aligns all of these different pieces of the puzzle together, but it's on you to take that next step and continue building more and higher on top of that relationship that is established. If that doesn't work, one of the things that our leadership has been supportive of, and what I would recommend, is reaching out to them and setting up monthly reviews where you're able to talk about the kinds of insights you learn, what you bring to the table. The first step to anything is awareness, and from there on, you can lead to further connections. The third piece of this, and I know this sounds mildly stalkerish, but look them up on the Active Directory and ask if they're willing to have an informal coffee conversation with you. Talk about your priorities, run it against theirs. See where you might be able to supplement or complement each other's data. Second piece of this, and this is actually where we got started. Typically, after you run your research is where you have findings. So there is a typical starting point for a conversation. Otherwise, it's hard to know what to talk about when you meet them for the first time. So share your findings, and then ask for analytics. If this is what I found, what are you seeing in the product? Are people doing what we think they are doing? Are they doing something completely different? If they are doing what you think they are doing, then you've found a stronger story to tell your product or your stakeholders about what they should build, which of the problems to focus on, and you have a quantified priority you're able to attach to all of the issues that you have found. Now, if they don't agree, that's actually the fun part, because what you've accidentally discovered is a third hidden door. In what world can both the qualitative and the quantitative insights be true? And what would those hypotheses be? And that becomes your new research project. And the next step, assuming that this has become second nature, you've built that habit of reaching out to each other, is start planning your research together. And the same things that we had demonstrated earlier in terms of if you know them and you know what they're capable of, you also know what parts of the answers they'll be able to inform. And that can also inform what you do as a next step within your research. So essentially, if you start with the business question, break it out into all of those different facets, different research questions, sit down and have a conversation then about what can you bring to the table, what should I own? And if the same question can be answered by both, which subparts of these questions can I own, and how will we put that together? You can have that conversation up front, and all of that friction goes away. And brownie points for this one. As you're conducting that research, if you're able to tag or bring your counterpart in, what I've seen over the years is that the analytics counterparts research and their findings become a lot better informed because they hear it directly from the source, and you're building that level of empathy that lasts very, very long. And at the same time, if you're talking about a particular study that you've already run, and this was a case very recently where my counterpart was able to look over my shoulder and say, oh, are you trying to basically measure willingness to use for the AI? I can add some behavioral data to that, and we can make that model a little bit stronger. And we were able to go to business with, here are the levers you have to pull. This is the strongest lever. That's where we need to go and have the biggest impact.
So now when that becomes very normal, when you are best friends, you are already working on projects together, the next step to take is becoming a little bit more proactive and start solving the biggest problems for the product and figuring out what those biggest pain points are and who are the users who are feeling that kind of pain points that we should solve for. It also helps if we can design some of the success matrix together, because oftentimes as this supportive function within the product, it can become difficult for us to figure out how much impact are we really creating. So having this success matrix together can really guide us that are we solving the right problems the right way, or are there things that we still need to do. So look at those success matrix together from a dashboard, from a periodized report, and figure out that if we are moving in the right direction or not. And if we are not, that kind of insights can give you access to this prioritized backlog that you can work off of to make sure that we are solving the most important problems for our users. And all of those sounds great, of course, in theory, but then we are always dealing with the real constraints of time and resource. So in our experience, what has worked best is to include collaboration as part of the process. So it's not something that we are ignoring or neglecting when we have these real challenges. So whenever we are talking about business question, the part that we are trying to figure out, what are the problems, what are we trying to solve for, it helps to have a cross-functional conversation with the key stakeholder in place as well, so that we understand the context and the problem that we are trying to solve. And it helps us create better research and analytics questions. And then we can go off of and do our own research and analytics, and we can figure out what the findings are. But in these phases, it helps to have regularly scheduled working session. So you are coming together on a regular basis and talking through your findings or your challenges. And it can also help to include some templates and checklists as part of the process as well. So in our case, we have some templates around how can we share the findings together to our stakeholder. For checklist, we have some checklist around what are the data sources that we should look into, what are the people that we need to invite to our next meeting, who should we reach out to triangulate and synthesize the findings that we have. And of course, looking at the dashboards or reports together to make sure that we are moving in the right direction of solving the right user problems. So this is our full framework in action. There is a lot going on here, of course, but this is just for future reference. Hope all of it makes sense because we have tried to build up to this total framework. So the point that we are really trying to make is, if it's not obvious by now, is that working together, bridging perspective can really help us get to happy user, but also happy business. Because analytics on its own can answer questions like, how big is the problem? How many people might be facing that problem? But then adding research insights to it can also help us understand the why, or how much of that is a pain point.
And on the flip side of that same coin, while research can easily answer the what and the why, it can also go that extra step of informing which one should we focus on and which one do we prioritize, especially in an age of limited resources.
And that's why bringing both together and collaborating can really help us get to this holistic idea of who our users are and what are their biggest pain points.
And while that benefits the business, what will benefit you personally is that you would become a lot more effective and efficient because you're able to squeeze a lot more out of the same kind of studies that you'd be running. And it would lead you to an effective product.
Join your partner in crime. That was wonderful, right? All the zooming in and zooming out of the frameworks. And I mean, of course, the metaphor of peanut butter and jelly and all things seamless collaboration. So what we're going to do now is kind of transition into getting some online Q&A. And of course, you know, you can stalk our wonderful speakers on the LinkedIns. But in terms of like the substantive nature of all things seamless collaboration, there are a couple really good questions up here that I kind of want to lead off with if you're open to it. So LexisNexis in terms of size, about what's the number of employees?
What about at 10,000 if you're looking at
10,000.
just our company, yes.
Sure. So there are people in the audience that are like, 10,000, that's so cute. And there are others that are thinking that's a pretty sizable organization. But the question here around large orgs, like you're getting a lot of data coming in, a lot of opinions coming in as well. What would your recommendations be for navigating kind of conflicting data points?
More often than not, the conflict can arise because you haven't defined what you're actually measuring. And depending on whom you ask, how big is the stake, it depends on who's looking at it. So more often than not, what it takes is for all of these different research functions to get together, define how you're going to be measuring and what you're going to be measuring. And from there on, it becomes a little bit easier. Not saying that all of those will agree perfectly, because a lot of it depends on instrumentation, what the tool's capabilities are, et cetera. But that is usually a great starting point to start avoiding those conflicts.
Yeah, and just to quickly add to that, the matrix that I was talking about, so defining what good looks like. Because in many cases, people have different ideas, as Archana said, based on their understanding, their expertise. But having that shared understanding of this is the problem that we are trying to solve, and this is what good looks like, this is how we know that we have solved the problem, helps.
Okay, that's great. I'm going to ping pong this back to Archana here. Harkening back to an earlier presentation from today, what we heard about is kind of the dual stage approach to delivering tactically as well as kind of thinking big picture and strategically. And there's a question here around kind of navigating and or prioritizing different research initiatives. So we have the big strategy level initiatives of trying to answer larger questions, maybe some things that are less than defined, versus at the lower level, kind of like product level and like click level interactions. How do you manage those trade-offs?
So as much as we proposed a framework over here, I want to be clear that our roles aren't always 50-50. So especially when you're starting to enter into areas that are unknowns, where we have no data to begin with, that's where I think research is maybe sometimes working in isolation. You're going off and running based off of market research data, customer support data, whatever you're able to get your hands on, and you're answering the big strategic, big picture questions with the usual methodologies. Jobs to be done is my favorite. But that said, typically on the tactical end of things, I think is where she probably spends a lot more of her time than I do in terms of making sure that things are working right, feeding things back into the prioritized backlog, because there is something to look at. So in terms of time split, I think research ends up being a little bit more forward heavy. That said, in terms of prioritizing, this is more a personal opinion than anything else. If you have only limited amount of time, big picture strategy questions have to take priority. You get those wrong, it doesn't matter what you build.
Okay. Anything?
No, she said it perfectly.
Right? She kind of nailed it.
Yeah.
So as far as our speakers are concerned, they have a wealth of professional experience that extends beyond LexisNexis, that includes Twilio, T-Mobile, and a shared experience consulting at Infosys. I'm curious because as a common thread, as a researcher, something that I've run into, something that's coming in from questions here is people discounting the value of research because it's more qualitative than quantitative. I'm just kind of curious from your perspectives how you kind of handle those sorts of objections.
I mean, that was one of the reasons that we built this framework, because for us, we feel like collaborating together and getting these insights together can make us a much more stronger case. not like really against our stakeholders, but like for our users, let's put it that way. So that's why like working together and combining all of these different data points that we have access to is the best bet for us to create that comprehensive narrative and be like, if you don't listen to this, I mean, we have such a strong case here for that problem, so.
Okay.
And we've also gotten to a point where we punt it to the right person. We say that we require strong confidence for that. You're not asking a deep question, you're asking a broad question. We need to go across the market, and we need to have higher confidence that this is a solution that'll work for everyone else. We need to work together on this one. It's not just qualitative. And they do the same thing when it's like, we don't know the why behind this, we need to go to research. So building that function, building that partnership is important. But in addition to that, in complete honesty, what has worked somewhat successfully with stakeholders has also been, if we don't do the qualitative research, here are the number of things that could go wrong, and I just want to highlight these as risks. So positioning those as risks can be convincing. Worst case scenario, if you run that research up front and you learn that you were fine, you spent a couple $100, but then you find out that you were wrong and you were solving the wrong why, it just could have potentially cost you millions of dollars.
Love that, the opportunity cost.
Yes.
Y'all, thank you so much. That was a great presentation.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you.